So, dude, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Stoked to have you sitting in Asher Goods here in Kirkland, Seattle, or Kirkland, Washington.
Washington, yeah.
Yeah, this is a cool place. The Pacific Northwest is it's a nice area, man. Did you grow up over here?
I did, actually, not far from here. Though, when I was young, we could walk down the street and feed the horses through the fence. Things have changed a little bit since then.
Yeah, what's different about it now?
Well, the word got out. A lot more people here, obviously. It's still a lot of the things that were great about it then are here now, but it's kind of the surrounding areas, the Pacific Northwest, the Cascade Mountains, the San Juan Islands, the ocean, but the proximity of Bellevue and Kirkland is a little different. 80 years ago, it was 100 years ago, whatever, it was all farmland over here.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine the transition it's had in the last couple of generations.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I even see that I grew up in a really small town in North Texas, about 9,000 people. And it's even changed a lot from when I grew up. I'm only 31, so I left there when I was 18. And I guess Super Walmart moved in right about that time. And it was the entire feel of the city changed. It's still this really cute Texas city, and I like going back there and hanging out, but it misses that kind of nostalgic feel. And I don't know if I've been to a place that has that really anymore, unless it's a real, like a novelty town. And I think about that a lot when I look at, if you fly over like in LA, right, or some big city like that, if you look at it objectively as if you weren't what created what's down there as a species, what that would look like on a living organism. Like if the planet is a living organism, like what we're doing in these metropolitan cities with all the concrete and how much adjustments we're having to make just to survive. Like even the idea of a road, right? That's kind of even a novel idea if you go back 2,000 years or less, really. The idea that we're going to travel 80 miles an hour to get from one place to another, like the accessibility to each other is great, but we definitely pay a price for it.
Yeah. That's one of the things I like about getting out into the backcountry, like I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
You might come across a game trail that's been hammered by a herd of deer, but that's about it. There's often no trails, no pavement, no hard surfaces that aren't rock and whatnot. But yeah, and I guess I just feel fortunate that we still have those places to get out into.
Yeah.
But also, trying to make sense of the changes we've made to our own environment and the juxtaposition there, and if we can find a happy medium at some point where we're not, living in a place that's so different from where our roots are.
Yeah. Do you feel like that has something to do with the growth of what's going on in the Seattle area and the Pacific Northwest? Is people, because you get that city feel and you can work in tech, but you can look around you and it's beautiful and it's really luscious and there's a lot of green. I noticed that about Austin as well. These places that are really blowing up. There's several hundred people moving to Austin a day. And I've lived there for the better part of a decade, and I've seen it change a lot. But one thing that's really great about it is that you can go paddleboarding right outside the city in a really beautiful lake. And if you drive 20 minutes, you can be in a place where the city is just a vague skyline, and you're out in the hill country, and you can get to see some wildlife, and you can take your dogs to dog parks everywhere. And it seems like there's a trend in a way to have more balance. You can live in an apartment in a high rise, but you do want to get out with your dog and run around and let them go swimming and almost feed off the energy of the outdoors to find some of it, because I think a lot of us don't ever get a chance. I'm grateful that I got a chance to spend a lot of time outside growing up and was hunting and going around with my friends. Like we were pretty wild, When we got trucks, that changes the game, right? You can get away from your parents for a little bit. But I think a lot of people are starting to realize how important it is to get your feet in the dirt more and more.
Yeah, well, you just use the word wild, and that's an interesting word, I think. If we just look around the city, we can find little bits of nature, I guess you might say. Whether it's a weed coming up through the crack or a pigeon or something. But I I wonder to what level of wildness those things are, and are we doing ourselves a disservice by removing that wildness from our lives?
Yeah.
I mean, having domesticated animals is, it's there's something about it that still connects us to the old wolves or whatever they were when they were before that. But the idea of a wild animal, when you come face to face with a wild animal out in the back country that hasn't been exposed to humans, it's a different experience. And I think that's something that is hard to experience in a place like this,
Yeah.
where everything's been sort of domesticated.
Yeah, I can see that. What do you feel like the biggest difference is when you come into a wild animal who may have not seen very many humans ever, or it maybe you were the first one, like coming across something that's truly wild, out in its element versus our normal, I guess, normal interactions with living beings that aren't humans?
It's, a sense of awe and appreciation and humbleness, and just seeing the power, and the energy these animals have.
Yeah.
You think of a domestic cow in a feedlot. It's standing around most of its day not getting much exercise, and you think of a wild elk that can run up and over a 10,000 foot ridge in the snow in the time it takes you to walk around the block practically.
Yeah, they say that about caribou too, right? They can run for like a full day without stopping, cover 30 miles as a herd in a day.
Yeah,
That's insane.
I don't know that they have the elevation to deal with as much as some of the Rocky Mountain elk, but yeah, they're pretty amazing too. They'll just, when they're migrating in the fall, they'll kind of walk along and eat as they go, and it looks very effortless, but they're moving faster than you or I would walk, and they're eating at the same time.
Wow. Nature's multitasking. That's cool. That's a wild animal. How big those herds get too really fascinates me. But even a herd of elk. I mean, is that what you call it? Is there a different word or a different name for a group of elk? A herd of elk? But I have something that I've been in awe of and for so long. I never had a chance to experience. I mean, I've seen some elk that were, I would say, semi-domestic in like Banff, Canada, where you can tell like the big bull has been kind of hand-fed,
right?
Which is a weird
close to
seeing
town.
Something that big that's just become accustomed to human beings is an interesting, and you can see it on them too. Like they're not as lean. They don't really have the same kind of I don't know, like kind of wildness to them. Like you can almost feel it.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I still enjoy seeing that.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a different experience and different feeling that I get when I encounter them in the wild. I mean, they're out there to survive. Their senses are just super keen. They can hear and smell things way better than we can. And they're, they've got other natural predators to deal with, and so they're on their toes all the time, and to just get up and close and personal to one takes, is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that's the most enjoyable aspect of the hunt.
Yeah. I like that, man. And have you come in contact with very many, I'm sure you've seen around, if you're in the backcountry, is these predator animals and the way that like wolves, grizzly bears, things like that? Like, have you come across any of that out in your wild experiences?
A lot more tracks. We've been on trips where we've hiked up the mountain in snow and came back a few hours later, and there were cougar prints inside our prints. But we never saw the cougar. We've seen brown bears up in Alaska, and wolves, but they always kept their distance because they like most wild animals, they're pretty wary, and they're they're they keep their distance from humans
Yeah.
because we pressure them. Um, but yeah, you catch little fleeting glimpses, and I remember another cougar that I came upon on elk hunting in the Rockies, which was feeding on a carcass of an animal, and I walked past it, looked at the carcass. It was 50 yards away. I didn't see anything, and I walked past it and turned around just on a whim, and this thing ran from the carcass back up into the woods behind me, trying to get out of my uh, proximity. And
Wow.
it was just, I mean, it was silent and fast. And if it had been coming for me and I
You
wasn't
would have
paying
never
attention,
known.
I would have never known. But typically these things are not hunting us, thankfully.
Yeah, I don't think that's not generally the case. I've heard some stories, but I guess there's always as many stories as there are. You think there'd be more with as many encounters as you see. But wolves are something that really terrify me, though. I think if you ever got in a situation where you're surrounded by a pack of wolves, I don't think you don't get out of that. I don't think many people. If you're alone, you don't get out of that.
Yeah, but do you know anyone who's ever been in that situation?
I've heard, like I said, secondhand accounts, but yeah, it's been they're so rare. It's just one of those things like you see it in the movies and you think, well, that's a beautiful animal, and something that really fascinates me about wolves is that the way they communicate, and I've been really intrigued by this for a long time and seen how they hunt elk and move them and essentially herd them to where they want them and manipulate the herds. Like it's it's a beautiful thing. I think predator animals don't get as much credit as they do for how intelligent they are. Like it really big cats, bears, like big cats and wolves particularly for whatever reason really kind of that scratches an itch for me. It gets me super excited. Think about that. I guess is it not Steve Ranella but Remy Warren he did a thing about the way wolves will herd elk in a valley
Mm-hmm.
and run them down, and they'll kind of bounce back and forth and essentially like pong them back and forth until they're exhausted. And I don't know, it just yeah.
They're pretty fascinating creatures.
Yeah.
And I have yet to encounter one up close and personal on a hunt. They've been long distance sightings and a lot of tracks. But I keep my eyes out. Got eyes in the back of my head.
Definitely.
But again, I sort of see myself akin, a fellow hunter in some respects.
Yeah.
We're out there doing the same thing.
I think that's a really well put and a great segue as well. Is that when we talk about hunting, I think that I get to spend a lot of time in like kind of spiritual and mindfulness communities, which I'm super grateful for. But I do feel like hunting is very misunderstood from that aspect. And I've had arguments with vegans, which I don't take personally. I think if you want to go that route, that's a great way because the way that we raise and harvest animals
Exactly.
now on a large scale is pretty fucked. Like,
Right.
and it's sad. I grew up around a lot of cattle, and it doesn't feel good. It definitely doesn't. But I think that choosing to participate in that predator cycle as a human being is something that's very empowering, and you get a different level of connection with the animals. And not to say that, let's put the caveat out there are asshole hunters. Like I said, I grew up in Texas where a lot of like drinking beer, getting drunk, sitting in a box, shooting a deer, whatever. It's like there's not a lot of respect for it. There's not a lot of connection there. And I
Yeah.
think that's what gets portrayed a ton. But there's more and more with guys like Steve Ranella and Remy Warren and Joe Rogan out getting connected to that part of their nature. Man, it's something I really think I used to take for granted and appreciate so much more now. Is the blessing of being able to participate in that cycle.
Yeah, it is. It is a blessing, and I mean having that opportunity here in the Northwest and particularly all the public land we have to deal with. But you're absolutely right, and that connection I think is the critical piece. How connected are we to nature, to the ecosystem, to the circle of life? I think by some accounts, the archaeologists say human or some form of human has been hunting and gathering for at least 2.6 million years, maybe longer.
Yeah.
And it's only been in the last 5 or 10,000 that we've, started farming and created a written language. And if I was to spread my arms out, my wingspan to represent 2.6 million years, 5 or 10,000 would be the length of the overhang of my fingernail. So it kind of puts it into perspective, and then that, going back to that idea of connection, I think in a very short amount of time we've become disconnected from nature. And I think that point is what brought me into doing what I'm doing. Really trying to help people reconnect to nature on a fundamental level. And hunting just happens to be one very unique way of connecting, because it requires us to be a full participant in the broader scheme of things and understand what's going on. So yeah, I mean, and to your earlier point, there is a broad spectrum of hunters or people that call themselves hunters, and some of which I don't choose to relate with.
Just like any group of people, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot to be said about that, about reconnecting with nature, especially doing it as an adult. And that's something I'm actually curious about with what you do. And you're teaching, you said holistic hunting practices or holistic hunting courses. So walk me through what that looks like when you bring somebody in and go from there. Somebody's interested in really curious and intrigued. They seek you out. Then what happens?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I mean, just to step back, I guess, a minute, my background's in civil structural engineering, and I went to undergrad and studied that and worked for a private firm in Seattle for a number of years. But way before that, I learned to hunt.
Yeah.
And the hunting is probably one thing I have most experience with out of anything. And I'd tried to figure out for years how to bring the things I feel while hunting sort of into my other parts of my life, and I was not succeeding very well doing that. So, long story short, a couple of years ago, I started this program called Human Nature Hunting, or the Human Nature Hunting School, with the idea that we would help people who are already looking for an opportunity to reconnect in that way. They have some interest, some curiosities or interests with and around hunting, but they don't have anybody in their family to teach them as a mentor. Now, hunting is sort of a way of life. It's not real easy to pick up over a weekend or even over a year.
Yeah.
I
was really bad at it growing up. Really bad. Like, I didn't have a lot of teaching, but I understand what you're saying. When you don't have someone in your family to really that's inspired to, or somebody who takes you under their wing,
right?
It's really hard to get back into it. I mean, I started doing archery and hunting with a bow when I was probably 25. It took me 4 years to harvest an animal. Like, it takes a long time, and it's not an easy road to hoe.
Right.
But I think what you do is, do you give people the opportunity to get out there and at least get their feet wet a little bit with good guidance and good teaching? Is that kind of the mentality?
Exactly. Yeah. Sort of our signature course is an intense 4-day course we run over in Eastern Washington, and we cover as much of the spectrum as possible. This is during the off season, so we're usually not hunting, but we're trying to give people the skills they need to feel confident to get out in the fall and hunt on their own, at least start hunting on their own. So get them over those hurdles. Where do I go? Where do I even start looking to go? How do I understand the regulations and seasons? How do I become a better rifle or bow shooter? How do I deal with an animal if I connect with one? So we spend a good day teaching them how to field dress, skin, and butcher an entire lamb in this case, from start to finish, and we actually eat it during the course. So they have a hand in taking an animal that um, has been raised by the local farm and slaughtered essentially, and sitting on the ground there, like you would come up to it if you had just shot it
Yeah.
and go to work on it from scratch.
And are most people that are doing that completely new to that experience?
Most are, yeah.
So a lot of them haven't really put their hands on a dead animal. I would assume if you've never been in that situation. I can't think of any other times I've really gotten my hands onto something special, especially when you end something's life. And
Right.
let's not make light of that. That's a whole experience in its own.
Yeah, and I'll expand a little bit on that part. The farmer who raises the lambs dispatches them at his place where they're comfortable and runs them right over.
Yeah.
We figured that was easiest on the animals, and this is one of the first things that people do when they show up to the course, and I decided I didn't want to start with that death experience right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Maybe just I didn't want to turn people off. It's not hunting, but it's the best we can do outside the hunting season.
Yeah.
It's very different to take an animal's life hunting, I think, than it is in a slaughtering.
1,000%. Yeah.
And I also think that it's something that we work up to and earn over time, kind of have that opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
So I guess if people are coming to these things hoping to experience what it's like to kill something, then they're not going to get that. But we're giving them the tools to get out there and connect on a deeper level, so that at that point, I think it's less about the kill and more about the connection.
Yeah. I totally feel that. So you get out there and you have an animal, and you're gonna break this animal down. You're gonna quarter it. You're gonna debone. Are we doing like full A to Z?
Yep.
All right. And then you get to eat the animal, cook the animal, prepare the animal all together.
Yep.
Oh man, that's amazing. I love that.
Oh, we do have a professional chef from Denmark who
No big deal.
is instrumental in helping us cook it right.
So what feedback do you get from people who go from that experience and go from an animal that's you're getting to see where your food comes from, really, and take a role in that? And then I think this is something that's so satisfying for me, is getting to eat that animal that you've harvested, you've seen, especially when you get to the point where you're ready to hunt and you've seen it walking around, doing its thing, experiencing its life, and then it's food. It completely shifts the way you look at meat, for one. And I'm curious if people have that same experience coming in without the hunting aspect.
I think so. We've had various responses. One guy from California is mostly a vegan, and he said his experience was sort of like eating meat as a vegan. He sort of going about it as he would, in the as you would anything else with the vegan mentality.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, maybe you can help me with the principles of veganism is to minimize exploitation of animals and suffering, right?
I haven't heard that before, but that makes a ton of sense.
Something like that,
Yeah.
I think. And I think that's exactly, that's very similar to what we promote in terms of hunting.
Yeah.
Now, I guess it's a point of debate as to how an animal suffers when it's killed. Though in the broad scheme of things and the amount of commercial meat that's produced and consumed in this country and this world, when you consider that, and then you consider hunting, where you're going out, you're spending days, weeks sometimes, working hard to get into the areas where these animals are, understand them, connect to the landscape, and maybe get an opportunity to shoot one. I think that there's a lot less suffering there for the animal's part. I mean, they're living a normal life, and the exploitation component is non-existent because it's illegal to sell wild game.
Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I didn't know that. Yeah, never thought about that before.
So I mean, there's a much larger and several other conversations in there about hunting or killing and eating meat, but I think if you choose to eat meat, I think this is one of the best ways to go about it.
Yeah.
Because not only are you needing to stay in shape to be out there to chase them down.
Yeah.
The source of protein doesn't get much healthier. There's no hormones, no antibiotics, no chemicals other than what's floating around in the atmosphere that we're all breathing.
Taking that in.
Free range, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to your question, what kind of responses? So that was one. This guy, he really thought it was a life-changing experience for him to put his hands, get his hands dirty in this process, in terms of having that connection to meat. And we've had folks that, didn't think they were that interested in hunting, but wanted to come out primarily for that one day of meat processing.
Yeah.
They called it meat camp.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To their friends, that's what they said they were
going to meat camp. I love that.
And they, they loved the experience, and at the end of the day, were much more intrigued about the whole process of hunting as it relates to, that part of the food.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks that come out are at least on the way, one foot into the process, one step into the process of wanting to hunt.
At least curious about what that's like.
Yeah. So we're sort of helping them get over those hurdles.
Yeah.
And a lot of them feel much more confident after just the 4 days to get out, in the fall and go start figuring it out on their own. Get lost and find themselves.
Get lost and find themselves. I like that a lot. When you think about going into an animal's habitat and you're looking to hunt that animal, what do you think about the energetic kind of exchange? And I think this is something that we overlook with food a ton, but when you're taking in food that has had a high stress life, I feel like you take in a lot of that energy too. Like that food literally becomes you. It gets metabolized into your physical body. And I think the way that I feel eating wild game meat physically is different. And maybe that's placebo, and I don't want to discount that, but there's something about the energy of that food that's lived a real full life. And when we say full life, I mean, when you harvest a whitetail deer, it's usually 3 to 4 years old, I would say. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Out of a typically 5 to 6 year lifespan ish.
Yeah, about
something
right.
like that. Yeah. So there's been this, they've lived a life, and a lot of deer don't even make it that long, depending on what the winters are like. And I can't really put my finger on it, but there's something about that's the wildness of the food, and it tastes wild, and it feels different. It feels like a completely different experience. And also, I think once I've get tapped into hunting, I honestly eat less meat. As weird as it is, I don't like getting food I don't know where it came from. I'm almost like a little bit snobbish about it.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you on both those points. The energy, I mean, I don't know that it's been tested or if there's a way to test it, but I feel like
people have done it with eggs, actually.
Have they?
With free range eggs versus with the DNA effects are different in some way.
Yeah, so you think about the extremes. I mean, the feedlot cows and pigs that are getting pushed around like, you don't even want to really think about it.
It's hard to see,
brutal.
Honestly, yeah.
And what they must be going through, the pain and the emotion, and
or just the
Or
sheer confusion. Like that's what I think that they live their whole life in that. Like if you were a human raised in a situation, and I get pretty heated about this because if you were to take your dog for example, everybody loves dogs, and you can emotionally connect to a dog, and you raise that dog in something the size of your bathroom, and you fed it there, and it had a place to shit or whatever, and it could but it was kind of in the same room. It had like a corner that it could kind of every week or so you get rid of its shit and piss, and it be in that room. If you could raise your dog its whole life in that environment, what would it be like? Or even in a cage next to other dogs. Like you look at that from the sense of a dog, which you don't eat, and people love, generally speaking, and people have a hard enough time going to a no-kill dog shelter. That's even hard enough, and people do the best they can to give those dogs the best life they can. And you think, man, that's fucked up. That's terrible. But then you look at that with the food that you actually take that life and put it inside of your body. That's something that's lived a very similar existence, but at the end got slaughtered.
Right.
It's a weird thing when you put it in those terms, and I can't imagine. It's even hard enough. Think about this, and I just haven't really put this together till now. But being around, let's say you go to a prison, right, or something like that, or even a detention center, and I've had a chance to spend some time in some of these places. It feels different there, right? The energy of that place feels different. There's a lot of scarcity, a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, a lot of regret, a lot of shame, and you feel that when you walk in. And that's really what a slaughterhouse feels like, or a feedlot feels like. The animals are confused. They don't even know how to really live a life. And I think that's the thing that really scares me the most is I think there's a lot of pain and a lot of fear, but generally just a state of a life full of confusion and misunderstanding. Yeah. I don't know, man. It gets me fired up.
Well, yeah, on some accounts, I'm practically a vegetarian when it comes to commercial meats. Because most, if not all, the meat I eat and my family eats is stuff that we've hunted. My niece, who's an early teenager now, but years ago she made a comment. We had gotten together for a family dinner, and she looked at everything on the table, and she made the conclusion that everything on this table is either caught, shot, or grown by us.
That's a hell of a way to live, man. That's awesome.
So yeah, I think there's something to that energy component, even if you can't put your finger on it. It just, the whole thing feels better to be starting out in nature and consuming, for lack of a better word, consuming nature rather than consuming confinement.
Yeah, I like that. So when you take people out and you start to add the hunting component into what you teach, and you're going out to the backcountry, is that where you take people a lot of times?
Well, this is all on our private land over in Kettle Falls, Washington, so northeast Washington.
Yeah,
but
so
it's quite a bit of ground and a mix of pasture and timbered.
Okay.
Ground, so we can hike around and get lost.
I like it. So when you have people that are new, what are some of the things that you've been doing this for a long time, and you guys kind of grew up in that world, so it's almost probably second nature to you in a way. You've been tapped in, you've connected to that before. You kind of have to reverse engineer that for somebody who's doesn't have the same imagination as a young human being. I think we have a little more capacity to connect there, and if you don't ever forget, it's a lot easier to stay in that place. But when you have to teach people how to remember, I think is what you're having to do essentially. What do you have people do to get the ball rolling when it comes to connecting to where they're at and what they're around, with the goal of, I guess, being connected to where you're at has a lot to do with success in hunting, whether or not you harvest an animal.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're just gonna have to come to one of the courses and read the book. No, that's a good question. It's not easy, and like we said earlier, it's not something that happens overnight. But it's a combination of things from simple things like having them journal about observations in the woods, maybe some guided imagery early on to kind of set the mind, in a state of set the scene a little bit.
Set the scene for the hunt, or just getting out into the woods.
Both, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, we're not, yeah. And we do some fun things like sort of what I consider an advanced form of hide and seek, where we're actually breaking up into teams
so awesome.
and more or less trying to sneak up on one another as we would in a hunting situation. So I give them pointers and kind of walk them through this and show them tools and things that they can use and do to see things that you normally wouldn't see if you're just walking, along, having a walk in the park.
Oh man. All right. So give me some of that. Give me a little bit of what you would see that you wouldn't normally see if you're just strolling around.
Well, going back to kind of the guided imagery, which is one of the first things I open with, is to try to get them into the mindset that our awareness is very expansive and can be very expansive. And so where most of the day we're mostly aware of what's right in front of us or right at our fingertips or the screen, that's very limiting. And it's possible to, push that out slowly or maybe quickly, push it out a few feet, a few yards, maybe 100 yards, and maybe push it out across the field. And so all of a sudden your awareness, theoretical awareness, is sort of encompasses this whole drainage basin.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like trying to speed read the environment for something that's a little bit different, something that stands out just a little bit. And it's those little things that stand out and catch your attention that will help you be a good hunter.
Yeah.
Because if you're walking through the woods, walking anywhere, and you're able to see an animal before it senses you, then you have an advantage to try to get the drop on it.
Do you feel like more senses, more, I'm not going to say, I know you'd feel this way, but it's more senses than just sight too. I think there's sight and hearing, obviously, like hearing something that's a little bit off or something moving, but smell is one that trips me out. When something, and I've heard this about elk and I haven't had that experience, but you can smell where elk have been.
Definitely. And that's, I think, mostly what we smell, what I smell. If I walk through an area where they've been bedded down, it's very obvious.
Yeah, whitetail are like that too. They have a certain smell to them, and it's especially the wind's right, and if you're in a little bit of a drop down where they would normally bed down, you walk through that, and then you look around and you didn't notice there's the bedding spots all around you. You're like, oh, I'm in the middle of it.
But again, their sense of smell is much, much better than ours.
Yeah.
But it is, I think it's important to tap into everything we can. And that includes, I think, our intuition, our gut feel.
Yeah.
And there's something about being out on these longer trips where, I'm out there for 3 or 4 days, maybe in a 2-week trip. And I go through this slow transition in those 3 or 4 days from kind of that earlier state of confined awareness to this broadening. And I'm waking up my senses, I'm smelling things, I'm hearing things, I'm seeing things, I'm feeling things. And my intuition starts to kick in a little louder than it normally does. And it will tell me to do things that don't make any sense. But if I start listening and following those inklings, they often lead me to good things. And it's hard to explain, but it's just,
yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
The gut feel.
It's funny how that works too. It really is.
And it's so easy to ignore those feelings too, and
yeah,
on a daily basis.
Well, they don't serve you as much, or they get drowned out. We're around so much noise all the time. Even, this podcast is primarily what I do, and it's from the podcast to lifestyle design coaching where I work with people one-on-one, and that's on a screen, and then I'm on my phone all the time, and it's I live in a world of distraction to the point where now I'm about to move to San Diego. One thing I'm so excited about, and speaking of just the energetics of places, is just being able to go put my fucking feet in the sand, go get in the water, get myself charged back up, get in the sun, and just be. And I haven't had the chance to hunt as much as I'd want to. Like, that's living 100% off my own game meat is something that me and a friend of mine just really, really share that goal. And that's really for one guy. If I'm living by myself, one elk a year, maybe, and then another animal somewhere along the way, I think would do it almost, huh?
I think it would more than do it unless you eat a lot.
I'm a big dude.
So I'd say on a typical elk, you probably could get 150 to 200 pounds of pure meat, no bone.
Yeah.
So say if you got a big elk and you had 200 pounds, that would be about 4 pounds a week.
Yeah, I think I would have a hard time knocking all that out. I mean, of course, you got to give 50 pounds of that away.
Right.
That's such a fun thing to do too, is share meat with people. That was one thing I noticed. Actually, I shot a pig with a bow not long ago, and I remember giving it to a few people, and I could tell the people who had hunted before appreciated it so much more. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, it's like, no, this is like I did this, and then I get to the point I didn't have a place to debone, but I quartered it out myself and did all the things and as much as I could, and then I would just take the quarters to the processor and get those turned into sausage or whatever. And I was sharing that with people, and yeah, like I said, the people that had hunted before were so appreciative. And I remember I took the back straps off the last year. I shot over to my friend's house, and we ate them for the whole family. You know, we were
nice.
And that was, man, it feels so fucking good. It's almost like that primal sense of providing a little bit, where
Right.
it's we all get to sit around, and what's funny is when you cook up a back strap or something like that, it rarely makes it to a plate. In my experience, it ends up sitting in the middle of a table with everybody picking at it with their hands or a fork and just catching up and getting together. And that's something I've noticed about wild game. I mean, dove hunting growing up. We would shoot dove in the morning, cook them for lunch. We would have dove and biscuits,
Mm-hmm.
deep fried biscuits, and then go back out and do the same thing in the evening. And I think I got to know people that I came to care about so much through the 4, 5, 6 years of doing that growing up. And it is bringing that to the table is something that's super. I don't take for granted at all as well. That's led to some of the most incredible experiences of my life and getting to know people.
I totally agree, and experienced that myself many times. You know, bringing some wild meat to a group dinner, and telling a little story about how I came to have it and what it took to get it, and people really appreciate that. And I think, like you said earlier, the hunters especially appreciate it because they know what went into getting it. I mean, it's a lot of work, the preparing for the hunt, going on the hunt, and then working hard enough to, connect with something, and then dealing with it, cutting it, skinning it, quartering it, packing it back out of the high country or wherever, and then getting it back to home or whatever and processing it down further. It might take a few days of cutting everything up into small pieces and packaging it, labeling it, getting it in the freezer. So you made a comment earlier that you feel you eat less meat as a result of hunting, and I totally hear you on that, because all the work that goes into that food makes me want to utilize and enjoy every ounce of it. Yeah. I don't want to waste it because it's wasted energy. That there's a lot of energy that went into it.
Yep.
And that's true for any food. I mean, that's true for a cow that grew up in a feedlot under unfortunate conditions, but because we're so disconnected with that process and the real work that goes into it, it's sort of easy come, easy go. And I did a little research a couple of years ago about the amount of food and the amount of meat. I think it's about 270 pounds a person per year that the average U.S. citizen demands in meat.
Damn, that's crazy. That's a lot of meat.
And there's something like 70 pounds of that is wasted.
So out of the 70 pounds are wasted.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like 20%, right?
Yeah, it's equivalent to about 2 lambs. Like, just
okay.
the meat, the meat of a lamb is maybe 35.
When you put it like that, damn. Wasted food is a weird deal. We produce so much food, and there's so many people that are hungry, and that may derail this conversation. I remember when we would hunting growing up, we would donate. I would donate about a quarter of the meat to the food shelter.
Mm-hmm.
That was something, and that's something everybody did during deer season. It was like the standard was like, it was, yeah. And now since I end up making dog food. In my experience now, I love that I like don't buy
Lucky,
dog food for like a month, and my dog
lucky
is
dog.
so stoked. He gets so excited about it. But yeah, the food waste is such an interesting deal, and especially when it comes to meat, because I mean everything has a life, and I think even wild foraged and self-grown plants, I would even say, has to feel similar. That's something I haven't had the pleasure of doing yet. But you said you grow a lot of your own food as well. I'm assuming that has a similar feel to it as far as getting your hands dirty. A lot of work goes into it, a lot of energy goes into it, and then it's a fun cycle because then it puts energy back into your life.
Yeah.
The circle of life, as they say on Lion King.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of a story of a guy I know on the East Coast that wrote a book called the Mindful Carnivore.
Ooh, I like that. I'll have to tag that into the description.
And Tovar Sorelli, he grew up fishing and spending time in the outdoors, and then I don't know, somewhere in his college years he experienced vegetarian and then went vegan, I think, for a while.
Yeah.
And as an early adult, he was trying to grow some of his food and was having these encounters with rodents and animals that are getting into his garden and eating his vegetables, and then realized that even the organic farm down the street that was providing a lot of his vegetables actually killed a few deer every year to just get them out of their crops. So he was coming to the conclusion that even if, even trying to live a life where you're not causing death, I guess, was nearly impossible. And long story short, he decided that, to get back into hunting, because then at least he could be responsible for that death, rather than putting it off, ignoring it, or paying someone else to do it.
Yeah. Outsourcing. You can outsource mowing your lawn, but I wouldn't. Outsourcing your meat is definitely a different conversation. So there's something I want to go back to, since we kind of got a little bit. This podcast is a little tangential. We kind of go down rabbit holes. But so you're taking somebody out, you're showing them that expansive awareness, which I think is funny how we look at that, and there's so many different ways, the different paths to that same end. It's actually a Buddhist idea too. When you look at loving kindness meditation and expanding, they do expanding compassion practices, where it's everybody in your proximity, then everybody in the room, then everybody in the state, and then on and on to every living thing in the world. It's like it's a bodhisattva practice, and that's exactly what I thought of whenever you were talking about your expanded awareness. Are you familiar with Tom Brown?
The tracker?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know he had some books about some of that similar concept of stilling the mind and being very perceptive as to all that's around you, and how expansive your awareness can really be. But I want to go into what it's like when someone who's brand new, has never killed an animal, probably never ended a life in that way at all, is with you, and they get to experience that. Like, they put the work in, they're out there for several days, and they get to have that experience. What is that like for you, and what is that like for them?
You mean actually shooting an animal?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I haven't had a lot of those experiences because I've chosen not to be a guide or an outfitter.
Okay.
This is focusing on giving people the skills to get out and do it themselves, because I think there are a lot of good opportunities, guided opportunities where you can have good experiences being in the hunt. Though I fear that a lot of times it's the guide that's doing the hunting, and the client is there, and their experiences can vary, of course, but it's only part of the experience. And that's not really what I was after. I mean, again, going back to the root of what this is helping people reconnect to nature and the ecosystem. It's not to help people go out and shoot an animal.
Yeah.
But that's part of it.
Yeah.
So, I have taken friends out, and more often bird hunting, duck hunting, and And there's always a level of, I think a couple of things. One is it's really hard to think about taking a life of an animal when outside of the context.
Yeah.
So to sit here and talk about it is one thing. To be out there in the hunt is a completely different thing, and it feels much more natural out there. And there's nothing I enjoy about killing at all.
I think that's important to cover because that's what I wanted to jump in and say is it's sad every
Right.
time.
Right.
It's not. It's an excitement, but there's a part. There's the compassion for the animal too. It's a strange mix of feelings that I don't think you get anywhere else. Of being proud of yourself and excited and grateful and sad, all at the same time.
Right.
It's wild, man. That's something else. Like and again, I'm not doing it. I don't get excited about killing a thing. That's not really that's such a little part of it.
Right.
But that is a part of it.
Right. Yeah. So it's a very unique situation that we have an opportunity to partake in. And like we were saying earlier, it's only been in the recent past that this has become less of a common occurrence. The hunting gathering society. But I forgot what your question was in the beginning.
Oh, but we were talking about just the feeling of the experience of being around someone who's harvested their first animal. Yeah.
Yeah. So I said there were two aspects. One, so the first one was out of context. The second, I think, is that people really begin to have a better understanding of how all these things come together, and they have a really deep respect for what just happened, and the animal's life, and just, if say it's just a duck, taking a minute to look at that and appreciate it and admire the complexity and beauty of wild nature, and
Yeah. And it's for someone who's never done it, they would think it's odd to admire the beauty of nature. You're killing a part of nature.
right.
That's one thing people say is, well, how can you think it's beautiful and then you kill it? And I don't ever have a good answer for that. I think that it feels natural, though. That's what it comes down to. It doesn't feel killing isn't fun necessarily, but it feels natural, like I'm participating in life in a way that is extremely full, and that I'm extremely grateful to have. And looking at I've never actually ever shot a duck, but I've seen with dove are the same way, quail are the same way, with the intricacies in their feathers and the way they move around. Turkeys are very similar, where they're a beautiful creature. They're a really beautiful creature, and I can't put my finger on it. I wish I was more articulate about it, but there's something about it, admiring that part of nature that's really beautiful.
And it might simply come down to a matter of genetics.
Oh yeah, you think so? That makes sense.
And a little more research on this might help, but I get the sense that even in the past, the distant past, over hundreds of thousands of years, not everybody hunted, but there were hunting parties. A certain percentage of the population hunted. Other people took care of other things and took care of the village, whatever. And so maybe it's been that only X percent of the population down the line has been hunters, and those hunters passed on their genes to their hunters, and maybe we just happen to be part of that line somehow.
Well, then I think that there's something to that for sure. And then epigenetic expression, right? How your environment can express differently through your genes.
Right.
Like they can shift and turn on and off, and that's super crucial. Have you ever read the book Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek? You heard of that?
No.
You'll dig this. So he talks about how in say older societies, right? It's a book about leadership through business, but he talks about, let's say, the Paleolithic era into tribal and nomadic societies. Hunters generally ate last, and leaders, and this is the same people that were, you think about Native Americans, the warriors, the hunting parties, people that harvested, ate last of the community. That being said, out of respect for an appreciation, the best cuts of meat went to the hunters. So everybody else would eat everything else, but they would leave. So the leaders ate last, and because it was a cycle of respect. And those people were also the first to fight, put themselves in danger, and die for the community. So it was a sign of respect in that way of the elder people, the people that weren't physically capable, people that were hurting. And I don't want to put this into male or female either, because that's super contextual depending on the situation. But yeah, so the leaders of the tribe in that way physically ate last. And that's one thing he talks about with organizations and businesses now is so backwards. Because you were the one that had to pay the price if things went poorly. So you were best off helping things be peaceful and smooth as a leader versus think about the financial crisis of 2008, right, where everybody who was middle management got prison time and the CEOs walk free, right, pay some fines maybe, but still get bonuses. And that culture has completely turned the way that we're used to living upside down, and nobody knows what the hell to do. It's a weird, I don't even know where I'm going with that, but I love that story though, where it's
why do you think I'm doing what I'm doing?
Why do you think I'm doing what I'm doing? No, that's great. So, and that's something too I wanted to cover is that it seems like it would almost be low-hanging fruit for you to be a guide, and guides get paid well too. That seems like that's a good business from the guys that I know that are a part of that. Was there any conflict? Would that cross your mind, or when did you make that conscious decision that that's not what it was about for you?
Oh, I think fairly early on. Getting back again to really what I wanted to do, which was, counteract the challenges we were having with a greater disconnection to nature. I was a fly fishing guide in college. I went out to Colorado for the summer, and to that I'd spend several days at a time taking clients out on a drift boat and going down the upper Colorado, and it was fun. And it during that summer at least, it took a little bit of the magic away for me for fishing, just because I was commoditizing it.
Yeah.
Essentially. And the expectations of the clients kind of got wrapped up in there, like they wanted to catch fish rather than just they wanted to be out on the river and enjoying, So it's all that to say that doesn't mean that's the way it has to be.
Yeah.
It's just
it's on your mind at least.
Yeah, I didn't really want to go down that road. Plus I wanted to be able to hunt during a fairly short hunting season on my own, with my family, with my friends.
Yeah.
And typically the hunting seasons are pretty quick, especially in Washington, sometimes only a week long for a general rifle elk hunting season.
Yeah. A week long?
Yeah.
And so can you explain to me, and this is something that, being from Texas, we don't have public lands to hunt. What is that like in that 1 week of being in, maybe you can explain a little bit more about public lands in general, because I think it's something people don't have a ton of context on. Like, how does that system work? I'm actually confused about it, to be honest with you.
System?
Yeah, like with public hunting lands. Like, that's something that's so foreign to me.
Well, it's a combination of national forest, BLM, state-owned land, Fish and Wildlife land, which is all open to hunting and all under the same rules and regulations and seasons. So anybody can go out and hunt there. They can hike there. They can go bird watch. They can mountain bike, whatever. And
Yeah.
When you have a concentrated hunting season, obviously you get a lot of pressure in certain areas where there are a lot of animals typically. And at that point, there's still a lot of people that don't like to work very hard.
Okay.
So you get higher concentrations closer to the roads.
Yeah. Or can you take ATVs in there at all, or is it all?
Some places you can.
So it's just, wherever that stuff's at, you're kind of.
So we typically seek out the roadless areas and the wilderness areas where you can't take motorized vehicles.
Yeah, use your fitness to an
Yeah,
advantage.
you either have to hike or have horses and pack in.
Yeah.
And so you get away from the majority of the people. And typically, the people that I encounter in the backcountry that put in that much work to get up there are usually pretty good people.
Yeah. Well, you've got to be ready for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had a buddy of mine who went on an elk hunt with somebody who was really out of shape. Super fit guy. His name is Kyle Kingsbury. And he was so frustrated. And he wasn't the hunter, right? He had never been elk hunting before, but he went with a buddy of mine, or he went with a guy he knew from back in the day. He's an MMA fighter, so he said the guy just one wouldn't quit talking, and two was just so slow. I was like, yeah, you've got to, if you're gonna I think you have a different context on people when you go spend a few days in the woods with them.
Right.
So I think in public lands they get a little bit swamped during that short season. That's a wildly short season. I mean, I know opening season of whitetail season and our opening day of whitetail season in Texas, it's like thunder. How many shots are going off all around now? Given the density of wheat fields and things like that, like there's so many deer. There's so many I think it's been said that Stephen Ranella said that from Meat Eater said there's more deer on the continent now than there were when Columbus landed due to all the agriculture. And I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's when he landed or shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
The conversion of forest lands and things. But yeah, the white-tailed deer, which as I understand it is one of the oldest of the deer family, and hardly changed since it was, came about, according to archaeological records, is a great success story of recovery, because it was overhunted, overharvested, overhunted. There used to be market hunting in this country, so you could hunt things and sell them. That's now illegal. So it was overhunted, and then their habitat was changed enough that those two things, not enough good habitat and food, and the numbers were dwindling. But then I believe it was the logging operations that started up again, 100 plus years ago, I suppose, created a lot better habitat for whitetails, because these regrowing forests after the first logging did not produce much food down at the deer level.
Yeah.
But once they came in and clear cut a big field, or a big stand of timber, all these young things would start growing on the ground, shrubs and bushes, and provided a lot more browse for deer to come in, a lot more food, and their numbers came way back at that point. And
it makes sense. It's funny how that situation works, and I've heard about that, and this may be completely out of context. I'd like to get your thoughts on it. But when they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone, I believe, how much it changed the landscape. Have you heard about that?
Right. Yeah. The elk were a little bit out of control in overgrazing areas and creating erosion on the riverbanks, and in fairly short order, a little bit of pressure on those elk. Did I say the wolves were eating the elk?
Yeah, the elk. You said the elk.
The elk were eating. A little bit of pressure on the elk by the wolves pushed them back off these areas that were real easy places to overfeed, and they came back pretty quick and reestablished themselves. The plants.
Yeah, even the streams looked different. The fish population was better.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about the downstream effects. And I think we have such a dualistic view. Like, it's wolves bad, elk good, deer good, hunters bad.
Right. It's hard to say whether anything is good or bad.
It's very gray. It's a very gray world. It's just different shades. So I did want to ask you, though, do you have any hunt or a couple of hunts that really stand out to you as moments that are super meaningful?
Meaningful. Yes, I'm sure I do. And because it's been something that's been in my life from day one, I haven't had necessarily the experience that a lot of the people I'm, going through these courses, they're adults, midlife, and all of a sudden getting into this where I feel fortunate to have been born into it, grown up doing it. My first memory period was riding on my dad's shoulders when I was 3 years old, and he was hunting pheasants in the Columbia Basin, and one rooster flushed at his feet, and he took a shot and kind of stumbled, and I was trying to hold on to his head, not fall off, watching all this take place in front of me, and obviously it made quite an impression on
Yeah.
me. So that might be one example of a hunt that left an impression. And I think over time, I mean, as I got into my early adult years and was able to make a little more sense and sort of philosophize about what was going on out there on the broader sense, I began to appreciate even more what was going on and what I was being a part of and the experiences I was having. I've kept a journal of hunting trips since I was 9 or 10.
Wow.
And at first it was just this is where we went, this is what we saw, blah blah. Some very factual details, but over time it became more of a writing a little short story about the experience and what I encountered and the lessons I learned and the questions that came up and those sorts of things. And so there, I guess there's kind of a period in there, and maybe in my late teens or early 20s, I really began to understand how significant a part of this was to me. My time out in the field and hunting and growing up that way, and the underlying energies that were at work. It was, I think, having hunted enough early on, I graduated out of that initial phase of wanting to just get out there and shoot as many things as I can and shoot my limit and shoot something to hang on the wall and shoot something to prove to other people that I was a good hunter.
Yeah.
And began to really dig deeper in the experience and the connection and what it allowed me to do in terms of feel like I was part of the Earth system.
I like that. Well said. I love that you journal that too.
Yeah, it seems like it's harder and harder these days to find the time and the quiet to sit down, but I still enjoy doing it.
Journaling is such a huge part of my life. I think I've said this several times, and on this show even, it's of the last 5 years, the most impactful thing that I've picked up as a daily practice. And I think there's a reason that getting grounded, people like walking barefoot in the sun and things like that, are become a part of people's practices all the time because they're impactful. And it seemed like you've incorporated that in your life as a really holistic view on it. And I'm glad you said that about early on in life, where you're almost like trying to improve your manhood, right? Have something to hang on the wall or shoot your limit as kind of a point of pride. I don't think about that stuff as much anymore, but I definitely remember being there. And it wasn't until my late 20s when I started hunting alone, that's when things shifted, and I got to really start thinking about it and questioning. I think you start questioning why you do it in the first place for a second.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of intrigue about what am I even doing here and why. You start thinking about killing, right? You start thinking about what it is. You start facing your own mortality, and then death becomes very real to you, which you don't have at 9 and 10, 11, 12, like when you start doing this stuff. And
Right.
I mean, I have some funny memories of hunting growing up with my granddad, who I don't think he'll mind me saying he's not a great hunter, but a fucking awesome human being. And we would like sit on the top of pumping units, like oil and gas wells, the little pump horse. We would turn one of those off. He worked at oil and gas,
Mm-hmm.
and sit on top of that with. I used to hunt with a lever action 30-30,
Mm-hmm.
John Wayne style little Marlin 30-30, and I still have that thing. I love that gun so much. Um, it was given to me when I was about 10 years old. It was the first one that I ever had that would kick. Like I could shoot the biggest. I was a big kid. I could shoot a gun. I could kick hard. I remember being so proud of that.
Yeah.
And one time we got off. I climbed down the pumping unit to go do something. I don't know what I was doing, like checking the feeder on the way out, and he was sitting on top, and it started up. I guess we didn't turn the power off. We turned the switch off, but not the power. So I'm 11, 12, and I'm running around in my granddad's on top of a pumping unit, so it teeter-totters back and forth. If you get anybody, for the listeners, that looks like a horse that pumps oil out of the ground. If you know what I'm talking about, like typical Texas Horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And he's on one of these things going up and down, yelling at me to turn the switch off. I got to go find the switch, which is like over somewhere. It was one of the funniest damn things. I'll never forget that. But
Quite a rodeo ride.
yeah, exactly what it looked like. It's this. Yeah, I was just riding this big metal horse, but and I remember, little things like shifting the gears in the truck on the way to go hunting and being really cold and being willing to tough out the sleet and just sit in it and be miserable. And he was, slowing him down when he tried to do whatever. And it was something about that, but very little that had anything to do with hunting. It was just getting to spend time with my granddad was so awesome.
Yeah.
Like I said, very little success.
I think the context, just like you say, being out there, the things you need to do to be there, create a lot of responsibility, and that in the context of hunting, I think, can produce a lot of responsibility for young people.
Yeah.
I started actually hunting when I was 9. Went out there with my own single shot 410 shotgun, and
You got to have a single. That was
my
a great gun to have.
pocket full of shells, but I've encountered a lot of 9-year-olds lately that I wouldn't trust to do that. But I think if they were raised in that environment and had some of those experiences, the scene could be a little different. But it's a different scene. Everything's changing, and I was going to say something about video games, but I think I'll.
No, go for it, man. I think you're right on there. I think that's shit. It definitely messes with the context of life and death. I don't think we give that enough appreciation either. Like that's as much as you're into it. As far as your brain's concerned, your monkey brain doesn't know what a video game is. Doesn't know what a podcast is. It doesn't know what an iPhone is. It runs on interactive chemicals essentially, and you get a lot of that same problem solving, victory, accomplishment from video games.
Right.
It's the same neurological system.
Right.
And I remember there's something, the single shot 410. I still have that too. That's the one that I got given when I was a kid. And being able to that and my little 22.
Mm-hmm.
I loved my little 22 as well. And whenever I was old enough where I got left alone with it and could just shoot trees and and known that I was responsible enough to not do something stupid. Like that was, I was so proud. When I was 8, 9, 10 years old, and it was like, hey, just sit. You're fine. You're out in the middle of nowhere. Like there's not much you could do. But, yeah. What are your thoughts on video games? I'm curious. And we're not talking about Buck Hunter in the bar. That's a different.
No, I was thinking about kids these days and the things that they're doing. Life seems to be busier and busier, and I don't know how my dad did it, but I'm just so grateful that he took the time to get us out, salmon fishing, backpacking. Both my folks were instrumental in that and giving us that foundation. I have an older brother and sister, and but I do see a lot of younger kids these days getting enamored and wrapped up in the video game world, and right or wrong, I don't know, but it's competing with the things we're talking about, growing up with dealing with real world situations, the responsibility to carry a loaded firearm safely and operate it
Mhm.
safely. And I don't think a video game will teach that.
Yeah. I, it definitely won't. There's a 100% chance it will not teach that. Grand Theft Auto does not teach you how to drive or wield firearms responsibly. It's confirmed.
Who knows? I mean, maybe we're evolving so fast that we're not going to need
Yeah.
to walk or anything. But
Well, the thing about it is with me when I look at that is not that I'm concerned so much, and this may seem a little cold, but not that I'm concerned so much with the individuals that are getting that's a big part of their life. More power to you. Do what you want to do. But what I get concerned about is in the future, right? If that trend continues and becomes such a humongous part of life, that those are the people that are making decisions what to do with public lands, and they just don't have any connection with it.
great point.
That's where I'm like, oh, well, I don't want that person making that decision if they don't even have any experience with it. Or there's already enough people in this country as a whole making decisions about things that they have zero fucking experience with. That's not something that you can take back. And we already treat the world like shit as it is. I think that getting out in nature and seeing when you're out, and you may have this experience too, when you're out somewhere that seems secluded but you still find trash, like, how is this even up here?
Right.
How did this get here? What's going on? And then you think about, like, I have a good buddy of mine who's an environmentalist and he's a hunter as well. His name's Kyle Tierman. He's a lot of things. He's a writer. He's a professional surfer, and he's a hunter. He's an awesome guy, and he talks a lot about plastic pollution.
Mm-hmm.
And because he's so tapped in, like just like the backcountry is for you, that's what the waves are for him, and the ocean is for him. And when he sees plastic pollution, like, it hurts his heart. It really does. You can tell when he talks about it that it really gets him wound up, and it's sad to see that, man. And we are so disconnected with that. And all you have to do is really see it once and know that I go on numerous rants about straws. I fucking hate straws. It's just like it's not that necessarily it's just the straws that are a thing, but it's this senseless, most of the time senseless thing that we don't even think about. We're so unconsciously
Single use,
using them one time.
disposable.
Yeah, and it's like you don't just pour it in your face hole. Like, it's not that hard. If you're sitting down somewhere, if you're inside somewhere, you can request a glass cup. You can not get a lid or a straw. And that cup is at least recyclable. Like, there's things you can do. And it's a small shift. And I did the math one time when I started getting fired up about straws for whatever reason. I think it was because I saw, once you see a sea turtle get a straw pulled out of its face, like, you think about it a little differently. And I was like, how many straws would I not use if I only used one when I needed one? They're there for a reason, and it's helpful sometimes. And someone brought up the point of not that glasses were dirty at restaurants, so that's why you needed a straw at a restaurant. I was like, get the fuck out of here! Like, shut up and drink out of it. Like, your messy ass isn't that clean either. Like, your glasses at home are dirty. Come on, dude. I was so annoyed when somebody said that. I was like, is that a real reason? But yeah, single-use plastic and how easy it is to make a small shift. But you have to see the consequences of not changing.
Right.
Like, the motivation of somebody that feels that they have a problem, like, if you feel like you're invested in the planet as a whole and that it doesn't belong to you. This is where I get really wound up when people think that the planet belongs to humans. It's like, yo, dude, we've been here for just a minute. And we're causing more problems. I can't imagine, and I'm not saying that it's never happened, but I feel that we're causing more problems than we're solving globally. And the problems that we're solving seems to be ones that we created in the first damn place. So as a whole, it really gets me kind of curious as to what it's going to be like in the future, and at what point the powers that be on this planet decide that it's had enough.
Right.
In a weird way.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm sitting here right now talking to you. I mean, that's why I'm not practicing engineering anymore. Someone thought I was crazy the other day that I went to school, got an engineering degree, and I'm not really putting it to use right now.
How long did you do that before you couldn't do it anymore?
Oh, 5 to 10 years, I suppose, kind of,
yeah,
plus or minus. But to your earlier point, it goes back to that connection. And the more and more aware of that I got, I mean, I was thinking more and more about the state of our environment, the way people are treating it. I mean, and the whole debate about climate change. I mean, who cares? We're still trashing our environment.
That's what I say. It's like it's happening or it's not happening. It's like, honestly, it doesn't really matter that much. We're not doing ourselves any favors. We're still, if climate change was all of a sudden tomorrow, like, oh, everybody agrees, unanimous, it's not real, it wouldn't change my feelings about how we treat the environment 1%. We're still doing so many things that are senseless and honestly embarrassing.
Right.
Especially as the United States, who we're supposed to be leaders. Yeah, I was like, oh, man.
So when it gets right down to it, I mean, like I said, that's why I'm sitting here talking to you. It's I started asking myself what it was I could do to make a difference about what we're talking about. And I didn't see, designing high rises as getting me there, at least very quickly. There's some merit to the idea of density, I suppose, in cities and whatnot. But you can also make the other argument that we get too clustered up and we lose track of that connection to nature. And that connection to nature, I think, the more I thought about it, the more I thought that having a real connection to nature might be the best antidote to this disconnection and unawareness and not caring about what's happening around us.
Yeah.
And I said, what can I do to help people reconnect to nature on a very meaningful level? And, there are a lot of ways to do that. Hunting is just one, but I think hunting is a very unique opportunity to do that. And there are not very many hunters anymore these days. And again, it wasn't about just taking people out for one weekend experience. It was about helping them really dig deep and find those connections. So I felt like an educational process was the best way to help the people that are really seeking that, and give something. What's the old saying where our greatest passion or greatest joy meets the world's greatest need?
Yeah.
That's kind of the spirit of it, and so it's not to go on and on about it, but
yeah,
it's just want to make the point that this is about hunting, but that's partly to your earlier question why I didn't want to just get into guiding. I wanted to do something that might have the potential for more deeper impact and really changing the way people look at and interact with our environment.
I like that. I think there's definitely something there. And you can plead the fifth in this question if you want. But do you have any psychedelic experience at all? Mushrooms or LSD or anything like that?
I haven't yet. But I must say I find it interesting to think about some of the more natural forms like mushrooms.
Yeah.
Those that have been around for a long time. And our ancestors, I'm sure, experienced them. And
oh yeah, I would imagine so. Not that I was there, but I have a very similar experience, and I've taken people on their first kind of guided mushroom experience. Mushrooms are I call them Uncle Mushroom. They're like kind of my teacher. But I think one thing that I got out of that I really appreciated early on was being able to be on a connector plant, which mycelium is, and that's. They connect underneath the forest floor. Like that's what they do, and that's they're a connector and a teacher in a way like that. And it's if you read Michael Pollan's book How to Change Your Mind, like he has a very good explanation of that. He also wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's an awesome author. But it was a couple of experiences out in what's called the Greenbelt in Austin, which when it flows, it's really beautiful, and when the weather's right, it's so good. But I was on probably like 3 grams of mushrooms, which is a medium dose-ish for me, and I was out there by myself with my dog, and of course in that situation my dog and I are basically the same person. He's having a great time, I'm having a great time. And I remember sitting on a rock, and things like this would happen, is I just picked up a big leaf off the ground that was floating in the water. And it had been sitting there for a while, so it had gotten kind of dark. I remember looking at this leaf and seeing every little vein, and I could almost see the cells too. Just everything was so vivid in this one leaf. And I remember it was like the first time I'd ever seen a leaf, and how intricate and beautiful that was. And it was just floating there in this pool that I had my feet in, just hanging out. And God, that was something else. And then I got the pleasure of taking people on their first experiences with psilocybin mushrooms, and got to see that with them too. It's like it snaps. Like, oh, I get it. Like, we're all in this together. Trees, water, rocks, plants, fungus. Like, we're all in this together. And it's something else. And I think since you've had so much life out connected to that, you almost, it seems like you bypass that. But when you lose it and it kind of gets buried, you got to kind of get a bulldozer and kind of clear yourself back off and start fresh again, because it takes some time to snap out of that.
Shoot, maybe I'm in the wrong business.
Well, to be honest with you, it's when you brought up guiding and commoditizing it, it's something it's been requested of me often is to lead mushroom ceremonies.
Mm-hmm.
And that obviously is illegal, but I talk about several illegal things in this podcast, and they haven't arrested me yet. But it comes out, and because people want, just like they want someone to take them out and show them these experiences and let them learn the ropes, someone that can be grounded for them and they know it's going to be okay, and check back in with. But then it gets really fucking weird when you think about charging for something like that.
Right.
And in that situation, I get caught up in, that's my way, and I have so much respect for that ceremonial space, and it can be fun and recreational too, that it gets really tricky. Like, I could run a retreat, right? We run Realness Retreats, and it's an experiential retreat where people get to go and like basically play as adults with intention. Lots of laughing, a little bit of crying, meditation, journaling, an intentional time that we create for people. And I love that. And honestly, I could have 20, 30, 40 people doing that and make $50,000 and not have I feel like I'd provided a ton of value for people, and everybody had an amazing time and we over delivered on what the price was. I feel super good about that. I have a hard time making money off of something that I respect so highly as that, and feel like I'm exploiting a gift. It's almost like if I was to do it, I'd have to just make enough money to make it make sense for me.
Right.
And that's it. And it's really, and I've been around shamans and ayahuasca that are the same way. Like, they're like, listen, here's the deal. This isn't that expensive. You're getting all your food paid for, everything's here. It's like, we just want to be able to eat really good food and live comfortably and provide this for people. That's all we want. And I think when you take a different mentality than that, it's you can't commercialize an ecstatic experience like that. It just doesn't. It just does. Like, even just talking about it, like, makes me kind of tense up.
Yeah, and maybe that's similar to the way I feel with guiding. It's commoditizing the hunt and the kill.
Yeah.
Versus holding people's hands up to that point and then letting them go have that experience on their own.
Which is so similar to guiding a mushroom experience. You're just like, you're essentially there to take care of all the stuff that's outside of the experience, so people can just be there and not have to think about anything else. And whenever they're like, something kind of gets a little bit awry, which will happen, you go, it's going to be okay. Just keep going. Right. But you've got to be in a place where you know that's what they need to hear when they need to hear it. I'm extremely grateful to do it, and I love doing it. I think I've actually spent more, I like to provide it for people, and that's something that's really incredible. But I definitely resonate with what you're saying there about commoditizing it.
I will say once or twice a year, during the general seasons, and it's longer than a week. I mean, that's rifle season for elk. Archery season started in September and runs for several weeks, and then there's a muzzleloader season, and then there's a modern firearm season.
What's a modern firearm?
Rifle.
Okay.
Modern
rifle. I thought yeah. So I thought that was something different, like.
And once or twice a year, we will invite the students, our past students, to join us in a group hunt.
Oh, okay.
We'll pick a spot, and after doing some research, and go set up base camp and have them pack in with their own gear, and if they want, and their own food, and it's not a guided hunt, but no, we're just kind of there to point them in the right direction, but mainly just to come back together as a group of friends in the evenings, have a dinner, tell stories around the fire, the wood stove, whatever. It's kind of that one final step into getting out there and getting after it on their own.
Yeah. And coming back to a base camp is nice too. I mean, that's hunting. A lot of times is you have a few guys and you're out there and whether you're glassing together and just surveying the land or splitting off and doing your own thing and following your own intuition to where it tells you to go. Man. Yeah, it's something special. It's a special thing, and I wish it was better understood, but there's a lot of misunderstandings in the world today.
Yes, and disagreements.
Yeah, there's an abundance of disagreements, I would say. Well, brother, I really appreciate what you do, and I appreciate you taking some time to hang out with me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the conversation.
Of course, brother. And then why don't you tell everybody where they can find you if they want to. Hopefully, some people want to come find you and get involved with what you're doing. Where's the best place to look you up?
Oh, probably the internet, humannatureHunting.com.
Human Nature Hunting.
We do these 4-day hunting courses, and we're going to do a little more in the survival realm, and we've been doing foraging in terms of shellfish out in the Hood Canal area. Teach people how to go out and find steamer clams, shuck oysters, and we do a big meal right there on the beach. So that
really,
damn,
that sounds awesome. Sign me up for that one. That sounds fun as hell.
Yeah, I'd love to have you join us. I tell a lot of people it's a good way to get your feet wet.
That's cute.
So yeah, humannatureHunting.com, and on the Facebook and Instagram as well.
Yeah, I'll drop all those links in the description. You don't have to put all that out there, but yeah, the description for everything you need to know, guys. And thank you, man. We'll see you soon. Hopefully, we'll go shuck some oysters.
Sounds good.
Later on. That's the show, everybody. I hope that you dug hanging out with Bruce. Again, super mindful dude. I'm sure you could hear it in his voice. If you're curious about hunting and want to get out and experience